The chamber of the alien council was carved from black stone and covered in strange silver light that floated across the walls like living smoke. High above the floor, the rulers of 100 worlds sat in long rows, their eyes glowing in colors that marked their rank, their voices filled with pride and cruel laughter. They spoke of humanity as if it was a fragile insect that could be crushed with one hand. The council leader rose slowly and raised his clawed hand, and the room became silent. He told them that humans would not last longer than a handful of days once the fleets arrived. He declared that Earth would break like glass under the pressure of the Empire. The others agreed with deep voices that echoed like thunder in the chamber. They compared humans to other conquered races. They listed the weak who had fallen, the gentle worlds that had bent their knees and kissed the claws of their new masters. One spoke of a planet that had resisted for 10 days before fire reduced it to dust. Another spoke of a proud warrior race that lasted only a week. Another remembered a species of thinkers who begged for mercy within 3 days. The chamber rang with cruel amusement. They believed that humanity was even weaker, too divided, too emotional, too slow to fight against an empire that had mastered war for centuries. But at the far side of the chamber, a shadowed figure sat in silence, his head lowered and his eyes hidden. When the laughter grew too loud, he lifted his gaze. His voice was not strong, but it cut through the noise like a blade. He said that the humans were not like the others. He said they carried something hidden that could not be measured with numbers or technology. The council hissed at him, some mocking, some angered, some dismissing his words as foolishness, but he did not lower his gaze. He said again that to underestimate humans was to invite disaster. The leader of the council sneered. His mouth full of sharp teeth, he asked the shadowed figure if he feared these creatures of soil and water, these fragile beings of flesh. The figure answered that he did not fear them, but he respected them, and that respect was the only shield against surprise. He warned that humans had faced endless storms on their own world. They had fought each other with fire and iron for thousands of years. They had survived ice and flood and plague. They had risen again, and again, even when their own hands brought them ruin. He said that a species that survives its own destruction is not one to laugh at. The chamber shook with more laughter. The leaders leaned back in their tall stone chairs. They pointed out that the human fleets were small, that their weapons were crude, that their world was still divided into nations. They mocked the idea that such a race could stand before the Empire. They asked how long could humans resist the endless waves of war machines? How long before they begged for peace? How long before they fell to their knees? The answers were shouted from every corner. 3 days, 5 days, 1 week at most, and the echo of those words rolled through the chamber like drums of victory before the war had even begun. The shadowed figure whispered once more. He said that when humans fight together, they change the shape of the battle in ways no one expects. But his warning was drowned in noise. The council dismissed him with a gesture and turned back to their plans. They spread maps across the glowing floor. Star charts filled the air like burning webs. The fleets were marked as arrows of light striking toward Earth. Commanders were chosen. Orders were sent. Drums of war thundered in distant hangars. The council was certain that within days the humans would be erased from stars. Beyond the chamber windows, the Empire stretched in every direction. Worlds enslaved, armies ready, fleets gleaming like oceans of steel. Yet far away on a small blue planet, people looked to the sky without knowing how soon it would burn. The council counted the hours of their victory, but the shadowed figure counted something else. He counted the silence before the storm, the stillness that comes before fire falls. He knew the truth, though none would listen. He knew that the war would not last days. He knew that arrogance blinds more surely than darkness. The chamber lights dimmed as the session ended. The leaders left with cruel smiles, their voices still echoing that humans would fall in days. The figure remained alone, his hands pressed together, his eyes hidden by the hood of his robe. He whispered into the empty air that the humans would not fall. He whispered that in their hearts they carried storms stronger than any fleet. He whispered that in minutes the arrogance of the Empire would be broken, but no one was there to hear him. And so, the council prepared for war, blind and deaf to the fate that waited in silence. The alien fleets moved across the black sea of space with shining wings of metal, their hulls glowing with power, their weapons ready to strike. From every direction their warships closed in upon the small blue planet that spun quietly in the dark. The commanders spoke with voices full of pride as they looked at the fragile defenses below. They said the humans had no chance. They said it would be quick. They said Earth would surrender before the first week had ended. Their soldiers laughed. Inside steel halls, they thought of humans as animals that had learned to play with fire, nothing more. Below on Earth, silence spread across the cities. Skies were filled with a strange red light from the burning trails of alien craft that blocked the stars. Children held to their parents. Soldiers stood on walls of iron. Scientists whispered to commanders in hidden bases. The whole world seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the strike, waiting for the thunder that would decide if their homes would survive. People spoke little, yet their eyes were bright with fear and with something else. Something deeper that even the aliens could not see, a will that burned like coals in the dark. Alien scanners passed over oceans and mountains. They marked the places where human weapons slept. They called them weak. They marked tanks as toys, planes as insects, missiles as spears from a forgotten age. The fleets circled like hunters around a wounded beast. They were certain of victory. They told each other it was only a matter of days, perhaps even less. They laughed as they listened to human broadcasts filled with static. They mistook silence for despair. They thought Earth was already broken before the first strike was even fired. But inside hidden chambers beneath mountains, inside silent bases under oceans, humans had been waiting, their voices calm, their hands steady. Lines of soldiers stood in cold halls staring at screens that glowed with alien light. Their commanders spoke few words. They did not shout. They did not laugh. They said only what was needed. Stand ready. Hold the line. Fire when the order comes across the planet, from deserts to forests, from high towers to deep bunkers. The same words were spoken. Simple and cold. We are ready. The first alien ship dropped low over the clouds. Its shadow stretched across the land. The ground shook under its engines. People raised their heads and felt the sky darken. The alien commander spoke in a cruel voice broadcast to the planet. He said, "Surrender." He said, "Your days are numbered." He said, "You will fall as all others have fallen." And his words were carried like thunder over mountains and seas. Yet the only reply was silence. Then a single human signal rose through the static, clear and sharp like a blade. It carried only 3 words: "We are ready." The aliens laughed again. They called the humans fools. They aimed their weapons and prepared to fire. But before their strike could fall, the air itself split apart. A human weapon hidden in orbit came alive. A spear of energy and metal struck the first alien ship. Light tore through its hull. Fire spread. Screams echoed through comms as the proud vessel broke into pieces. It fell in burning shards across the ocean, and the silence was shattered by the roar of victory. The first alien ship, destroyed in the first minute of war. Shock spread through the alien ranks. Commanders shouted in disbelief. They said it was impossible. They said the humans could not reach them. Yet their screens burned with red warnings, their eyes filled with the sight of their fallen vessel. Humans fired again. Another weapon hidden in the black of space came alive. Another alien ship burst into flames. The Empire had expected days of easy conquest. Instead, in the first moments, they were bleeding fire into the void. Their laughter was gone, replaced by confusion and fear. On Earth, the people did not cheer. They did not shout. They only tightened their grip on their weapons, their eyes hard and cold. For they knew the battle had only begun. Commanders spoke again in calm voices. Target locked. Fire again. And once more the skies above Earth lit with burning ships. Once more the aliens screamed as their fleets tore apart. Their commanders realized too late that silence had not been weakness. Silence had been waiting. Silence had been the mask of a predator hiding in the grass. And now the predator had struck. The council far away received the first broken reports, static and screams, flashes of fire. They frowned. They said it was only a small victory. They said it meant nothing. But in the deep of their hearts a shadow began to grow. The words of the warning whispered again. Humans are not like the others. And though they tried to push it away, they could not, for the numbers on their screens told the truth. Fleets that should have crushed Earth in days were falling apart in minutes. The battle of first contact had begun. The humans had answered, and the war was no longer a prophecy of alien victory. It was now a storm rising from a small world that refused to kneel, and the silence of Earth had become the roar of fire. The alien fleet, once proud and unbroken, now trembled in confusion. Great vessels that had crossed 1,000 stars burned in the skies of Earth. Commanders shouted across channels filled with static. They demanded order. They demanded to know how human weapons had struck them. Yet answers came only as screams and broken signals. Their maps of war now showed holes where their strongest ships had been. Their formation bent and cracked like glass struck by a hammer. Humans moved with calm precision. From hidden bases under oceans came the signal to rise. From tunnels dug beneath mountains came the order to strike. And from silent orbits above the world came the fire that the aliens had never seen before. Kinetic rods of iron fell like meteors. Invisible until the moment of impact, ships shattered, armor split, fire spread like rivers across the sky. Alien soldiers who had laughed only minutes before now stared in horror at their burning vessels. One alien captain called out that this was impossible. He said no primitive world could build such weapons. Another cried that the Empire had been deceived, that spies had failed, that humans had hidden their strength in silence. Their voices cracked with fear as more fire rained from the dark. Ships twisted and fell. The black sea of space turned red with explosions. The aliens had come to hunt, but now they were the prey. On Earth, men and women watched from bunkers as the sky lit with storms. Their commanders gave no speeches. They gave no cries of joy. They spoke only in steady words. Lock the next target. Fire on my mark. Adjust the angle. Fire again. Soldiers obeyed with hard eyes. They had trained for this moment. They had dreamed of it in silence. They knew the price, and they were ready to pay. For in their hearts, they carried a fire stronger than any machine. Alien fleets tried to regroup. Their leaders ordered tight formation. But human strikes broke them apart again and again. It was as if Earth itself had planned for this dance. Each move countered before it began. Alien ships turned their weapons on the planet below. Beams of light cut the sky. Towers shook. Oceans boiled. Yet humans did not retreat. Their weapons rose again from hidden silos. Missiles that split into 1,000 burning arrows filled the heavens. Alien shields failed. Alien armor cracked. In seconds, another squadron was gone. One alien commander screamed across the council channel. He said humans were fighting like no enemy before. He said their tactics made no sense. They seemed chaotic, unpredictable, but every strike cut deep. Every move was designed to break the Empire's rhythm. The council chamber far away filled with uneasy whispers. They had spoken of days. Now they heard of minutes. They had spoken of laughter. Now they heard of terror. The shadowed figure who had warned them spoke once more, his voice calm in the storm of fear. He said this was the truth of humanity. They were not bound by patterns. They were not slaves to logic alone. They were wild and free and dangerous. They could turn weakness into strength. They could turn silence into fire. He said this was only the beginning. The council tried to silence him, but deep in their hearts they knew his words were true. Back in orbit, the war grew faster. Alien ships fired wildly, trying to break human traps. But every time they thought they were safe, another hidden weapon rose. Satellites disguised as junk became blades of fire. Old rockets hidden in forgotten warehouses launched into the sky. Even human planes armed with crude missiles struck from the clouds. Each strike a cut. Each cut another scream from the Empire. The battle that was meant to be easy had become a nightmare. On the ground, people held their breath as alien wrecks fell burning into oceans. Children saw the night sky filled with fire and thought it was the end of the world. But soldiers whispered that it was only the beginning. Scientists whispered that the plan was working. Commanders whispered that victory was not far. They did not cheer. They did not relax, for they knew the war was not yet won. But in their eyes burned the light of hope, a light that the aliens could never understand. Alien survivors tried to retreat. They called for backup. They begged the Empire for more fleets. But the signals took time to cross the endless dark, and every minute more ships died. The war that should have lasted days was collapsing into fire. Alien arrogance broke apart with each strike. Their prophecy of human weakness burned with their vessels. The truth was written in smoke across the sky. Humanity was not falling. Humanity was rising. The alien council watched in silence as reports poured in. Their claws gripped the edges of stone tables, their eyes wide, their voices weak. No laughter now, no mocking words, only fear that echoed in the chamber. The leader tried to speak, but his voice cracked. He demanded that reinforcements be sent. He demanded that the humans be crushed before the Empire lost face. But another counselor whispered that it was already too late, that the humans had done what no one else had done. They had broken the Empire in minutes. And so the fire awakened, not just on battlefields, not just in the skies, but in the hearts of humans everywhere. A fire born of defiance, a fire that would not be put out. And as the aliens screamed and their fleets burned, the shadowed figure whispered again in silence. He said this was only the first spark, and that soon the galaxy would see the storm that humanity carried within. The sky above Earth burned with endless light as alien ships twisted in pain. The Empire had believed it would take days to bring humans to their knees. Yet now in minutes their proud fleets were breaking apart. Their commanders shouted orders across broken channels. They begged their soldiers to hold formation. They tried to bring order back into chaos. But the fire of humanity cut through their plans again and again. Every strike came faster than the last. Every trap opened like a hidden mouth ready to devour. Human weapons moved with a strange rhythm. Not neat, not perfect, but full of sudden changes that confused alien minds. To them, war was order, war was numbers. War was lines that moved like machines, but humans fought like storms, sudden, wild, unpredictable. One moment silence, the next a burst of fire that tore through hulls and shields. Alien crews could not understand. Their charts could not predict. Their logic could not hold against chaos given form. And in that chaos, humanity found its strength. From mountain bases, missiles rose like spears thrown by giants. From submarines hidden deep in oceans came the roar of fire. From skies filled with smoke, human planes cut through beams of alien light, striking with weapons thought too simple to matter. Yet every strike hit true. Every attack was guided by eyes that refused to close. Alien soldiers watched in disbelief as machines they called primitive destroyed warships older than human nations. They screamed that this was impossible. They shouted that their enemies were nothing but children with toys. But the truth burned in their eyes as ship after ship was lost. Inside command rooms, human leaders stood with cold faces. They spoke in short orders, their voices never shaking. They knew the cost, they knew the risk, but they did not waver. They carried centuries of struggle in their hearts. They carried the memory of wars fought among themselves, of empires risen and fallen, of cities built and burned and built again, and they turned that memory into fuel, into power, into fire that reached beyond the stars. Every order they gave was sharpened by history. Every strike they launched was guided by survival. Alien fleets began to fall apart. Some ships turned and fled. Others crashed into each other as panic spread. Their commanders called them cowards. They ordered them back into the fight, but fear spread like poison. Their pride cracked like thin glass, for they had come expecting prey and had found predators instead. One alien officer cried out that the humans were devils. Another shouted that they were fighting shadows, not soldiers. Another whispered that perhaps the prophecy had been wrong. Perhaps it had always been wrong. But their words were swallowed by the screams of dying fleets. Earth's people watched the battle unfold on screens hidden in bunkers. They saw the skies painted red. They heard the thunder of alien ships falling into seas. Yet they did not cheer. They only held each other tighter. They knew the battle was not done. They knew more fleets would come. But in their silence there was no fear now. There was something harder, something brighter, a belief that they could endure, that they could fight, that they could win. The fire of defiance had been lit, and it would not go out. The alien council far away sat in their black chamber, their eyes wide as report after report arrived. Their voices, once filled with laughter, now trembled with doubt. They demanded explanations, they demanded answers, but their generals had none. Their maps of war that once showed victory now showed broken lines. burning fleets, cries of defeat. One counselor whispered that this was a mistake, that the Empire had underestimated too deeply. Another argued that this was only the first clash, that the humans would still fall. But even as he spoke, new messages arrived, filled with screams, and the chamber grew colder with every passing second. On the battlefield, alien voices cracked with despair. They called for retreat, they begged for reinforcement. But time moved too fast. The humans struck again and again, their weapons tearing through defenses as if made of paper. One squadron tried to hold the line, but was erased in seconds. Another tried to shield the flagship, but fell apart under the storm. Commanders watched as their fleets turned to ash. They asked how this could be. They asked why their empire was failing, and the answer came in silence. The answer was written in fire. The answer was that humanity refused to die. In those minutes of fury, the war changed forever. The empire that had ruled for centuries felt fear for the first time. Its soldiers who had never known defeat now tasted it like blood in their mouths. And the humans who had been marked as weak rose like giants from the ashes, their faces lit by burning skies, their voices steady as they prepared the next strike. They did not see themselves as heroes. They did not see themselves as conquerors. They saw only the need to survive, and in that need, they found power stronger than any prophecy. The Alien Council tried to believe that this was only chance, that it was luck, that the humans could not repeat it. But deep inside they knew the shadowed figure had been right. His warning had been true. The humans were not like the others. They carried storms in their hearts. They carried chaos in their hands. And when that chaos was unleashed, it turned empires to dust. The council fell silent as the truth became clear. They had counted days, but minutes had been enough. And as the last flames of the battle faded into the endless dark, the world below stood unbroken. Its people scarred but alive, its armies bloodied but burning with fire. The war was not over. Greater storms still waited in the void, but in those minutes humanity had shown its face. And it was not the face of prey, it was the face of fury. In the great chamber of the Alien Council, the silver flames that lit the walls flickered, as if even they were afraid. Rows of rulers who had once laughed at the weakness of humanity now sat in silence, their claws tapping against stone tables, their glowing eyes wide with disbelief as messages of destruction filled the air. The council leader's voice cracked as he demanded order. He shouted at his generals to explain how humans could break fleets that had never been broken before. His voice echoed, but no answer came. Screens shimmered with static. Broken cries of alien commanders begging for help filled the chamber. Ships burning, fleets collapsing, squadrons vanishing in fire within minutes. All of it was shown in cruel detail. The arrogance that had filled the council only hours earlier melted into fear. One counselor whispered that this could not be true. Another said the reports were lies. But the images of wreckage drifting through black space could not be denied. The Empire was bleeding, and the blood was falling from wounds cut by human hands. The shadowed figure who had warned them before rose slowly from his seat. His voice low but sharp. He said this was the cost of arrogance. He said he had told them humans were not like the others. But they had laughed, and now they were paying the price. His words spread like knives across the chamber. Some counselors hissed in anger. Others lowered their heads in shame. Yet none could deny him, for the truth was burning in every report that arrived. The humans had crushed the prophecy of easy victory. The leader slammed his claw upon the table, sparks flying from the stone. He said the Empire still had strength. He said reinforcements would come. He said the humans could not stand forever. But even as he spoke, another transmission arrived. Another fleet broken. Another flagship destroyed. Screams echoed from the speakers until they were cut in silence. The leader's words died in his throat, his eyes wide with fear that he could no longer hide. Around the chamber, the counselors argued. Some demanded retreat. Others demanded full war. Some begged for caution. Others for fury. Voices rose higher and higher until they became nothing but noise. Fear had cracked their unity. The same unity they had used to enslave worlds, now gone in a single night of fire. One counselor shouted that humanity carried madness. Another called it cunning. Another called it chaos. But all agreed it was deadly, deadly in ways no one had prepared for. Far away, the Empire's civilians watched their screens in silence, their faith in endless victory shaken. Their children asked if the humans were demons. Their elders whispered if the Empire had finally met its end. Fear spread through markets and temples. The whispers became rivers of doubt, and still the council fought among themselves, trapped between pride and terror, unable to act with the clarity they once boasted. The shadowed figure spoke again. He said the humans had turned silence into a weapon. They had hidden their fire until the last moment, and now the fire had consumed fleets faster than time itself. He said to fight humans with arrogance was to walk into a storm with no shelter. He said the Empire must change, or it would fall. The council spat at his words, yet none could deny the truth, for as he spoke another broken message arrived. Another fleet gone, another commander lost, the pattern too clear to ignore. The leader of the council pressed his claws against his eyes, his voice heavy. He said they had been blind, blind to history, blind to the warning, blind to the truth of what humans were. But still he tried to cling to power. He said the Empire was vast, its resources endless. He said the humans could never face the full weight of their might. Yet even as he spoke, another map lit across the chamber, showing red marks where fleets once stood, and the marks faded one by one until only silence remained. Fear filled the chamber like smoke, thick and choking. Counselors whispered that perhaps they should retreat, perhaps they should offer terms, perhaps they should wait and study this strange enemy. But pride pulled at them. Pride told them to fight. Pride told them to crush humanity, even at the cost of oceans of blood. The chamber shook with their cries, but beneath it all ran the cold current of fear, a fear that no voice could erase. Outside, the chamber fleets still burned, human weapons still struck. The empire that had ruled the stars was breaking minute by minute. Its warriors who once saw themselves as gods now screamed as they fell. The humans who had been mocked as weak stood unbroken, silent and steady, every strike carving deeper into the myth of alien supremacy. And with each passing moment, the council felt the walls of their chamber closing in, as if the storm of humanity was reaching them even across the stars. The shadowed figure whispered one final warning. He said the humans would not stop. He said they had been forced into war, and they would see it through. He said the Empire had unleashed a fire that would not die until every chain was broken. His words echoed across the chamber as the council fell silent once more, their arrogance shattered, their hearts filled with the horror of truth, the horror that the Empire had been wrong, the horror that in their pride they had awakened something far greater than they had ever imagined. And so the chamber of the alien council stood frozen in fear, once a place of laughter and certainty, now a place of dread. And far away the humans continued to fight, continued to burn, continued to rise, their fire turning minutes into history, their fury turning prophecy into ashes, and the council knew that nothing would ever be the same again. Beneath the burning skies of Earth, the truth of humanity began to rise, not in grand speeches, not in glory, but in the steady voices of soldiers and the silent labor of scientists. In bunkers under mountains, commanders gave orders with calm faces. In hidden labs, engineers pushed buttons with hands that shook yet never stopped. Every person carried the same fire, a fire born of survival, a fire born of endless struggle through history. And now that fire blazed across the heavens. The alien fleets had believed human power was measured only in weapons and machines. They thought numbers would decide the war, but they could not see that the true weapon of humanity was the will to endure, the will to stand even when the walls fell, the will to rise even when hope was gone. And it was that will that filled every human eye as the war grew hotter. Every strike born from a promise whispered in silence, "We will not die." In fields where families once walked, children now hid in shelters. In cities where towers reached the sky, people sat in darkness as power failed. Yet no voice cried for surrender. Instead, whispers passed through the silence like sparks. "We can fight. We can endure. We will not kneel." These whispers became rivers. Rivers became oceans. And that ocean of defiance spread across the world until even the stars seemed to carry its echo. The aliens saw fire in the human heart, but they could not understand how such fire could grow stronger with every wound. Flashbacks rose in the minds of commanders as they watched alien ships burn. They remembered wars of the past when nations fought each other with iron and flame. They remembered cities falling yet rebuilt. They remembered empires rising yet crumbling. And they remembered that humanity had always stood again. No storm had ever erased them. No darkness had ever kept them down. They had written history with blood and still carried on. And now they would write a new chapter, not for Earth alone, but for the stars. In deserts where old ruins slept, missiles launched into the night. In oceans where whales swam, submarines rose to strike. In forests where shadows hid, soldiers moved like ghosts. Every corner of the planet answered the call. Every soul gave something. Even those who could not fight gave strength in silence. And that silence became a shield that told the aliens this world would never break, no matter how many fleets they sent. No matter how bright their weapons burned, humanity would still rise. The alien commanders shouted in rage. They said humans should have broken by now. They said no species could stand against the Empire. But as they spoke, another of their fleets vanished in a fire, and their voices cracked with fear. They began to understand that the humans were not fighting for conquest. They were not fighting for glory. They were fighting because they had no other choice. And when a species fights with nothing left to lose, there is no power in the galaxy that can stop them. The Council watched with shaking claws, their maps emptying of fleets, their charts filled with red scars. They tried to speak of pride. They tried to speak of honor. But those words tasted like ash, for deep inside they knew the truth. The Empire had never faced such an enemy before, never faced a species that had lived so close to ruin for so long, never faced a people who turned pain into strength, and that truth filled their hearts with terror. On the ground, a young soldier whispered to her comrade that she was afraid. Her hand shook on her weapon. Yet she lifted it again. Her comrade told her fear was not weakness. Fear was proof of life. And life was what they were fighting for. Their words were simple, but they carried the weight of every human heart. Fear did not stop them. Fear pushed them forward. And it was this truth that aliens could never understand. For they had forgotten fear long ago. They had forgotten what it meant to fight with all or nothing. The shadowed figure who had warned the Council long before spoke again. His voice carried across the chamber like cold wind. He said this was humanity's truth. Not technology, not numbers, but spirit, a spirit that refused to be chained, a spirit that turned weakness into strength. He said the Council had opened a door they could never close. For once humanity was pushed into the fire, it did not burn away. It became the fire itself, and now that fire would spread across the stars. Reports continued to pour in, fleets gone, armies shattered, alien commanders begging for salvation, but none came. And as the Council listened in dread, they realized that the humans were teaching the galaxy a lesson written in flames. Never mistake silence for surrender. Never mistake smallness for weakness. Never mistake humanity for prey. For within them lived storms no prophecy could control. Storms that now tore apart the Empire minute by minute. And so the truth of humanity rose clear, stronger than steel, brighter than flame, carved into the night sky by fire and blood. And even as alien ships still circled, even as danger remained, the humans stood taller, their eyes lit by fury, their hearts unbroken. They had shown the galaxy who they were, and nothing would ever erase that truth. The last alien flagship drifted through the smoke-filled void, its black hull cracked and bleeding fire. Around it, the shattered remains of once proud fleets turned slowly in silence. What had begun as a march of conquest now looked like a graveyard of broken dreams. Inside, the flagship commanders shouted in panic, their voices sharp and wild. They called for reinforcements. They begged for order, but only chaos answered. The empire that had never known defeat was crumbling in the span of minutes. On Earth, the skies still burned red, but the people stood unbroken. From bunkers and towers and shelters, they watched the great vessel above. They knew this was the heart of the invaders, the symbol of their power, the proof of their arrogance. And they whispered to one another that if the flagship fell, then the war would change forever. Soldiers gripped their weapons. Scientists adjusted the last coordinates. Commanders spoke in calm voices. The time had come. The final strike was ready. Alien weapons lit the skies as the flagship roared in fury. Beams of white light tore through the clouds. Oceans boiled. Mountains cracked, yet still the humans endured. Missiles rose from hidden silos. Kinetic rods fell from orbit. Planes soared through fire to deliver their payloads. Every strike shook the great ship. Every impact left new scars across its armor. The aliens screamed that it was impossible. They shouted that the humans could not kill the heart of the fleet, but the truth blazed brighter with each moment. The truth that no armor could protect against the storm of human defiance. Inside command rooms, human leaders stood in silence as the strike approached, their eyes fixed on screens that glowed with alien fire. They gave no long speeches. They offered no promises. They only gave the order, fire, and across the planet weapons obeyed. The sky itself seemed to split as countless projectiles rose in unison, a storm of steel and fire aimed at one target. The flagship trembled as the storm consumed it. Shields failed. Hulls cracked. Screams filled the alien channels until silence swallowed them. The council far away watched in horror as their final vessel broke apart. The chamber that once rang with cruel laughter now echoed with silence. Counselors stared with hollow eyes, claws shaking, voices trapped in their throats. They had spoken of days, but minutes had taken everything. They had spoken of weakness, but strength had risen where they least expected. They had mocked humanity, but now humanity had written its answer in fire across the stars, an answer that no one could deny. The flagship split into two great halves, flames spilling into the void, fragments scattering like meteors across the heavens. And with its fall, the invasion ended. The Empire's proud banners torn down in the eyes of every watching world, silence spread across space, heavy and endless. Then slowly the cheers of humanity rose, not wild, not careless, but steady and strong. The sound of a people who had survived, the sound of a world that had refused to kneel, the sound of truth carried on the breath of millions. Yet even in victory, there was no arrogance in the faces of human commanders. They knew more battles would come. They knew more fleets would arrive. But they also knew that the galaxy had seen what happened in those minutes of fury. They knew that empires built on fear now trembled. They knew that humanity had shown its truth, and that truth would never be erased. They whispered to one another that this was not the end. It was only the beginning. In the ruins of alien fleets, strange signals drifted into the dark, survivors calling for help, fragments of empire reaching back to their worlds, messages filled with fear. The humans listened in silence. They did not mock. They did not laugh. They simply recorded every cry, for they knew that every word carried proof that the empire was not invincible, proof that fear had returned to their enemies. And that proof was worth more than any single victory. The shadowed figure in the council chamber lowered his hood at last, his eyes burning with light. He said the words the others feared to speak. He said the empire had awakened a storm it could not control. He said the humans would rise now, not as prey, not as slaves, but as a force that would reshape the galaxy. Some counselors hissed in anger. Others bowed their heads in despair, but none could deny him. For the truth had been carved into the stars by fire. Back on Earth, the people walked from shelters into streets filled with smoke and ash. They looked to the sky where the last flames of the flagship still burned, and they felt the weight of what they had done. They were tired, they were scarred, but they were alive. And in their silence there was pride, not the pride of arrogance, but the pride of survival, the pride of a species that had stood together and refused to fall. Children held the hands of parents. Soldiers carried the wounded. And the world moved forward with quiet strength. The galaxy watched in silence. Worlds long enslaved whispered that perhaps freedom was possible. Species that had bowed to the empire for centuries whispered that perhaps chains could be broken. The fall of the flagship was not only the story of Earth, it was the spark of something greater. And that spark spread through the dark like fire on dry grass. Unseen by the council, unseen by the empire, but alive and growing, fed by the truth of what humanity had done. And so the war that was meant to end in days ended in minutes. Not with the fall of Earth, but with the fall of arrogance. Not with the death of humans, but with the death of fear. The council that once laughed now trembled. The empire that once ruled now bled. And humanity that once was mocked now stood as a storm that would not be stopped. The fall of the flagship was the fall of an old order and the rise of a new one. The final flames of the broken ship drifted into the endless dark, silent and cold. Yet in that silence a voice seemed to whisper, not from the council, not from the empire, but from humanity itself. A voice that said, remember this moment. Remember that we will not kneel. Remember that in minutes we crushed what you thought eternal. And remember that this is only the beginning. The throne of stars will never look the same again.